Hey, if you've been teaching reading for a while, you have probably seen that many instructional approaches and curricula have seemed to come and go. You've probably also heard all the buzz about the science of reading. You may be wondering if the science of reading is just another trend or fad that is here to leave as quickly as it seemed to come in. We're here to tell you why the science of reading is here to stay and to talk about how you can easily incorporate some of these strategies into your lessons. Now, we're also going to be sharing our Science of Reading blueprint, so make sure to stick around because we're going to be sharing how you can access that blueprint and how you can use that in your setting. I'm Corey with Ascend Smarter Intervention, where we make research-based instruction both easy and accessible. And today, we're going to be talking about the research models behind the science of reading. Now, you might be wondering, why is everyone talking about the science of reading? Well, the reason that everybody's talking about this is because the National Assessment of Educational Progress continues to run studies to look at how students are doing in their proficiency in reading and math. And what we've seen is that year over year, students are not reaching a proficient level in their reading skills. In 2022, we saw that 67% of fourth graders and 69% of eighth graders were not reading at a proficient level. And so we know that we need to be having this conversation so that we can change some of these trajectories. Because we know that students who aren't reading at a proficient level are 4 times more likely to drop out of high school, they're more likely to come in contact with the juvenile court system, and they're more likely to be in poverty. So we need to be thinking about these research-based strategies. We need to be thinking about evidence-based practices so that we can change that trajectory. So what is the science of reading? Well, the science of reading is the collective body of evidence and research that helps us to understand how the brain develops literacy skills, where breakdowns might be occurring, and how best to support students validated by the research. It's not necessarily a specific approach, and it's definitely not a curriculum. What we do know is that reading and writing are reciprocal processes. So while we call it the science of reading, we really should be calling it the science of literacy because we can use the same strategies that we're thinking about for reading to help support writing as well. Now, there are 3 key models that we want to talk about when we think about the science of reading. Not because there's only 3 studies out there. There are hundreds and thousands of studies that have supported the science of reading, but we find these to be a good umbrella that can help us to really understand the science and think about how our educational practices are measuring up. So we're going to be talking about the literacy processing triangle, the 5 core components of reading, which we call the 5 core components of literacy, and the simple view of reading, plus the advancements that have been made over time. So the first model we want to talk about is the literacy processing triangle. Now, the literacy processing triangle was popularized by Mark Siedenberg, and essentially what it's doing is telling us about the neural processes in the brain. We know that when students are reading and writing, they're connecting multiple different areas of the brain. There's really a neural pathway that's happening that is connecting 3 key areas that we want to think about. The first is semantics. So understanding meaning of words, sentences, passages, that meaning processor in the brain. This is going to require context and background knowledge and a number of different language skills that we need to have in place that we'll talk about. The next literacy processor is the phonology processor. This is responsible for understanding the sound structure of the word. So for example, if we have the word bat, we could break that word into individual sounds, b, a, t, and that's how we can sound words out when we're reading and sound words out when we're spelling. Now, the phonology processor has a number of different processes as well that can help to develop our ability to sound words out when we're reading and spelling, as well as to manipulate sounds and words to help build fluency. The last processor is our orthographic processor, which is our ability to look at the visual symbol and make meaning of that visual symbol to recognize that symbol is representing a specific letter that in turn represents a specific sound. Now, orthography can get a little bit more complicated because while we think about the word bat and we have a B, an A, and a T, that's relatively straightforward. This can get a little bit more tricky because orthography can also represent patterns like TH or TCH or TION, and we have to recognize that as a visual pattern that make different sounds. Now, the literacy processing triangle is very important for us to consider because it helps us understand the neural structure and what is happening from a cognitive process in the brain. Now, we need to think about what's happening in the brain to drive our instruction. When we think about our instruction and how our instruction can take that literacy processing triangle, we can use the 5 core components of reading. The National Reading Panel came up with an entire meta-analysis of a lot of the research that had been done by the year 2000, and they found that the 5 core components that we need to be incorporating in our instruction to develop the semantics, phonology, and orthographic processing include phonological awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. Now, that aligns with the simple view of reading and the advancements that we have had. The simple view of reading basically said that the combination of language comprehension and word reading ability would lead to skilled reading comprehension. Now, that was a great first step in helping us understand that we need to develop both of these areas to make sure that students are able to ultimately comprehend what it is that they read. As we began to progress, we recognized that within the idea of language comprehension and word recognition, there are a number of sub-skills that need to come together. Scarborough's rope was an excellent visual that many people use to help visualize all of the different strands that come together to help support that language comprehension and word recognition. More recently, the active view of reading by Duke and Cartwright in 2021 also really reflected back that, yes, all of this is correct, but we also need to consider the bridging processes. So these are not necessarily all just individual skills, but some of the skills rely on other skills in order to be efficient. We also need to be considering active self-regulation or executive functioning skills, which had largely been excluded from the research up until this point. We've always known executive functioning is important, but this particular study really looked at the incorporation of executive functioning as part of the model, which is a fantastic addition. So what we've done is we've taken all of these models and put them into another visual to help us understand the connection of each of these processes and why it's so important that we are addressing each and every one. Now, how do I incorporate the science of reading into my lessons? It's all great to have the research, but what do we do with it? Evidence-based instruction needs to include those 5 non-negotiables: phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. But we also need to do it in a building progression. So we need to make sure that we are teaching things in a systematic system or framework so that these skills are building on top of each other. We're laying the foundation and bringing it all the way up. We work from the sound level up through syllable type instruction, word level decoding instruction, as well as vocabulary at the word level. We focus on sentence level reading and thinking about the syntax and the structure of those sentences that we have and how that impacts meaning. We focus on paragraph level instruction and making sure that we are comprehending at the paragraph level. And then we can move into the passage level and beyond, where we can start to really stack each of these different skills onto one another. We want to make sure that we're not just teaching phonological awareness and then some phonics and then some vocabulary and some fluency and then some comprehension. We want to make sure that we're pulling it together so that it's cohesive and it's all being done in an explicit and systematic framework. So how do the different approaches align with the science of reading? Well, there are a number of different approaches, again, that we have talked about in the terms of coming and going. And we really want to think about how each of those aligns. So the whole language approach was really focused on the semantics piece of that literacy processing triangle, or really thinking about comprehension and using background knowledge and using strategies, some of those executive functioning strategies, to help figure out what words said and to figure out the meaning of stories, passages. And so that was more of the whole language approach, really focusing on that top piece of the literacy processing triangle. Now, Orton-Gillingham, or phonics-based instruction, was another approach that really focused more on the bottom piece of the literacy processing triangle. So very heavy focus on the phonology processor and the orthographic processor, and making sure that that connection was in place as well. Now, Orton-Gillingham instruction is a systematic phonics-based instruction that is focusing on the connection of the phonology and orthographic processors. So really a heavy focus on phonics and sounding words out. Balanced literacy came later. In 1996, this became very popular. And balanced literacy, the goal here was to find a balance between whole language and phonics-based instruction. Now, this was a great first step in getting us closer to incorporating all 5 of those core components that we know are so important. But one of the drawbacks was that it wasn't necessarily done in a systematic and explicit way. So we might have been hitting a little bit on phonics and a little bit on PA and a little bit on vocabulary, and it was a little bit piecemealed. And so the science of reading, or the structured literacy approach, which follows the science of reading, said, yes, we need to do all of these things. We need to take the best from whole language. We need to take the best from that systematic phonics-based or Orton-Gillingham instruction. We need to take the best of what balanced literacy had to offer, and we need to make sure that we're doing that in a systematic and structured way so that each of these skills are building on themselves in a really meaningful way. Now, if you take a look at the Science of Reading blueprint, we're going to walk you through all of these models as well as what that stair steps looks like to help get you started so that you feel like you've got a really good understanding of the science and the why behind that structured literacy approach, so that as you begin to put your lesson plans in place, you can understand why each piece is in there and you can start to differentiate so that you meet the different needs of your students. Now, hopefully this was helpful. Feel free to like and subscribe to be the first to know when we drop new videos where we share freebies, tips, and tricks to help up-level your literacy instruction.